Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. I'm sitting down with Tom Christopher, founder and CEO of the Christopher Group. Tom, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
It is both a pleasure and an honor, Laura.
So, Tom, what is new and exciting?
Well, these are certainly crazy times, but we at TCG are very, very busy, getting a lot of engagement from current and new clients on very senior level HR retained searches, but also quite a bit of activity in our freelance consultant and interim HR leadership divisions as companies are preparing to return to work. So it is very, very busy times at TCG, so very excited.
Yeah, so as America is going to start opening up next week, what are you hearing from HR executives across the U.S.?
Yeah, again, these are unique times. There's no playbook on any of this. There's no best practices. There's no case studies. And so it's kind of a learn as you go. But clearly there are some themes that are emerging in light of the announcements from the White House as well as the various governor's offices across the country. Number one, it appears that, we're over the hump, and we are definitely seeing a marked and measurable decline in the morbidity and mortality rates, which is very, very encouraging. There's also a lot of optimism of the 80-plus therapeutics and vaccines that are currently under test. And I personally have spoken to a couple of our clients that are on the front lines of that activity, and they're very encouraged that in the next 6 to 12 months, if not sooner, we will see both therapeutic treatments with high efficacy as well as vaccines getting through the final stages of testing and be ready to roll to the market. So I'd stop short of saying that COVID-19 is yesterday's news, but from a medical perspective, we're hearing from our clients that are involved in it as well as, the other information that's in the public that we're really closing in on solutions. Finally, America's getting ready to go back to work. We cannot leave people at home. We cannot stall the economy much longer. And so everybody's starting to ramp up. And everybody's got a little different model depending on where they are in the country, as well as what kind of industry or business or vertical they play in. And so it's got different implications for different companies. But if you ask me the bottom line, it's on a case-by-case and company basis. There's no one magical formula or blueprint we're seeing. Everybody's got a different formula, even when we're talking with clients in the same vertical that are competitors. They've got different approaches of how they want to reopen and phase back in.
Mm-hmm. And as these companies are preparing to reopen, what are the significant considerations and strategies that are surfacing?
Yeah, so there's several considerations that are common to every organization we're working with. Number one is health, safety, and the protection of the human capital base. And that's more than just the activities that are being undertaken. It's how are we communicating that? How are we role modeling that? And how are we inculcating it into our culture? The CHRO that I spoke with recently said it's not enough to have a procedure to ensure the safety of your people. You've got to communicate it. You've got to role model it, whether it's the wearing of gloves, the mask, the social distancing, etc., because people want to feel safe. And that's more than a policy or a procedure. It's cultural. And how do the leaders in an institution role model that? Obviously, the second consideration is sequencing and staging. There's interdependence in every corporation between department to department. So if you bring one back and you don't bring another one back, what does that mean? Or in what order do you bring them back? What's the level of criticality? Once back, how do we make sure that we stay aligned and we stay synergistic? Because they're not all going to come back at once. They're going to come back in phases. So we got to make sure that those that are working remotely are integrated, synergized, aligned, focused, and working in unison with those that have come back. And then finally, once everyone's back, it's preparing for, okay, how do we make sure we keep the place safe? And what does that mean? Particularly as we head into the fall, if there is any form of relapse or this disease pops its head again before we have effective therapeutics and or vaccines. So it's kind of those four dimensions broadly that our clients are thinking through, and they're doing it in cross-functional unified teams. Virtually every client we work with now has a task force, and it's typically populated by HR professionals, legal professionals, operations folks, finance folks, marketing folks. It's a true cross-functional team, and it's typically 1 to 2 layers down below the C-suite, and then they work with the C-suite on edits, adjustments, implementation, communication. And that's the typical or the prototypical kind of format or structure that we're seeing to navigate these times in this disease.
And what are the risks and what are the opportunities over the next month as we transition?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think they kind of go hand in hand. We are seeing this consistently, and we are working with clients on these exact topics. There are tremendous opportunities to communicate, to role model, to inculcate compassion for the employees, flexibility, adaptability for families that have been affected, particularly those that have been laid off. And so what can you do to minimize that impact financially as well as from a benefits perspective? What are you doing to ensure the safety, health, and welfare of your people once they return to work? So one part of it is while they're away, and then the other part is when they come back. And then finally, how do they communicate and use this as a fantastic opportunity to say, we're going to survive this, and then our business model is going to thrive. And as we survive it and transition now into the thriving mode, here's what we're doing from a business perspective to ensure the long-term viability of our company and whatever position you occupy. There's tremendous opportunities to build culture, and it's all about vision, alignment, communication, etc. What are the opportunities? The obvious. Number one, you don't want to bring people back and promise them a safe work environment only to find out that's not the case. The plaintiff attorneys are circling, and I was at a conference call last week on this exact subject where organizations are going, we know the plaintiff attorneys are out there and they're circling. So if we come out and we start making promises and creating impressions that we can provide a safe environment and it's beyond what we can guarantee or what we can do, we're setting ourselves up for a pretty big legal liability. Also, if we have breakouts and we don't act responsibly and timely, that could be a problem because, technically that would all be workers' comp. And then finally, the whole morale side of it, which is if we don't handle this responsibly, if we're not overly conservative and cautious, what would it do to culture? What are we saying that we put profits before people? Okay? And I had one client say something to me last week. He said, I don't understand this concept of profits versus people. They're not mutually exclusive. They're interdependent. You can't have profits without people, and you can't have people without profits. And so what we've got to do is find a way to be mutually inclusive, not exclusive. And so that gets to the opportunity of how do you do that, how do you communicate it, and how do you have people feel energized about it. Conversely, it's a threat or it's a risk factor because if you don't do it properly, you have inherent legal risk, you could have morale and cultural risk and turnover, and you could have unnecessary illness in the work setting or outside of the work setting. I think the bottom line, Laura, that you've probably heard in this call as well as others, this is a leadership opportunity for HR, for functional heads, for executive committees. In times of great strife, people want leadership. And leadership is, this is where we're at, this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, and we are going to work overtime to communicate, to align, to adjust, to adapt, to celebrate when we hit milestones, to pivot and adjust and adapt when we hit the inherent speed bumps and potholes. In a nutshell, this is all about leadership. And the companies that are thriving right now have very strong, demonstrative, planful, deliberate leaders and leadership teams. My clients that are struggling right now are companies that do not have strong leadership, that are, quite frankly, far too participative. The old saying, a camel is a horse that was designed by a committee. This is not a time for a camel. This is a time for a group of people to come in, make the best decisions with the data that they have, align, focus, energize, inform their teams, and get them moving in one direction. So it's really leadership.
And how is TCG supporting past, current, future clients, and what are you looking forward to in the next coming weeks?
We have been very, very, very busy, and I would say primarily in our freelance consultant and project manager positions. We have an unbelievable group of very talented senior HR leaders who are trained at the very best shops in the world. And they have stepped up, and they're very good at these kinds of situations: crisis management, transformational leadership, communication, alignment, culture management. That's their strong suit. So we have many clients, most of which are new, calling saying, I heard your podcast, and we could use some help with this. We'd love to hear what other organizations are doing, and we need somebody to help us and our task force and our leadership team frame a very simple but very effective plan to survive this illness, an epidemic, and more importantly, thrive coming out of it. Use it as an opportunity to build culture. Use it as an opportunity to align, inform, energize, and engage your workforce. And so we have consultants that are working with various clients, and that's what they're doing. And it's pretty impressive, the results. You know, you can take tough situations and take the lemons and truly turn it into lemonade. And it can really define your culture. And I beckon back to 9/11. The company came out of it stronger and more unified than ever. That is kind of how America rolls. It's in our DNA. When faced with adversity, coupled with great leadership, you're going to have incredible engagement and commitment. And so our consultants are helping to provide that.
Well, Tom, as always, it was a pleasure to speak with you today.
Pleasure's all mine. And coming up on Friday, we have our next session of CHRO Spotlight. This week is going to be David Poole. David is a phenomenal CHRO, has worked at some of the best HR shops in the world. Most recently was the head of human resources at ACI out of Naples, Florida. And for the listeners' edification, ACI is the largest financial clearinghouse for credit cards in the world. 21 of the 23 largest banks in the world use ACI. And just to give you scale, they do $16 billion worth of transactions, plus or minus, a day. So this is an amazing company. And David was their head of human resources and chief people officer, and did some really innovative things from a leadership perspective and high HR impact orientation, and yet working in a very, very high-performance work environment. So we're excited to have David speak to our listeners this Friday. He's got some really interesting perspectives on what it takes to be a great, impactful HR leader. So please tune in for this Friday's podcast.
Looking forward to it. Have a wonderful week, everyone.